So it already sounds like we have a bit of a mix of people that are on the call today. So it sounds like we have some staff. So I'm going to say I am not like an expert in volunteering or behavior programs. I guess my experience is I have been a part of, or I have worked and volunteered at various shelters where they do have behavior programs. So I kind of incorporated some thoughts on what I've seen really work. But as we talk through this might be applicable to your shelter depending on your kind of population, like what your animals look like and also what your volunteer quorum looks like. But we can talk about, if this doesn't quite work for you, we can talk about different ways of how we can actually, change it or apply it to your individual situation. So I do have some slides I was going to share. Honestly, I'm happy for this just to be more like a conversation as well. It's not like me presenting and this is, feel free. You can put your hand up or you can type a message into chat or just, chime in. I do have more people coming in. Okay. So let me try and share my screen. Okay. Okay. So I guess just to start off, I'll do a little bit of an introduction of me and who I am.
Ain't letting her back out, are you?
No.
Okay. So I am, my name's Suzanne. I am a certified dog behavior consultant and accredited dog trainer through the IAABC. I'm a CPDT KA.
So what would you tell me about the food conspiracy?
Let me see. I thought I took a picture of that.
I'll see if I can mute everybody. I'll just try and mute everybody just so we don't have any feedback through there. I have been working in shelters for almost 10 years. I work with dogs, cats, and more recently, I've also started working with horses. I do work for a lot of, I also worked for a year as a volunteer coordinator. So I had about 250 volunteers with me. And that was like a structured behavior program. And yeah, I work for, right now I do a lot of work for individual clients. I still do a lot of working within shelters and rescue. I think as maybe Lynn was talking about, doing a lot of kind of post-adoption kind of behavior consults or maybe foster consults for behavior dogs. So just so if we do get the dogs out the shelter, try and keep them in homes because that's one of the challenges. We don't want to see those dogs with challenging behaviors coming back to the shelter. So that's a little bit about me. So just to start with, like, I know a lot of it, some of us may have volunteer programs, some of us may not, some of us, what does that look like? What does it mean? So I've just kind of listed some of the stuff that behavior volunteers do. I'm not sure if everybody here predominantly works with dogs or some people work with cats. I've really focused more on dogs here, but I have put some stuff in here for cats. It's very applicable to both species. And I do feel sometimes like cats just don't get the same focus or interest, but it's important we do focus on them and their behavior as well. So some things, walk dogs. Quite often at most shelters, any volunteer can walk dogs, but I guess that's one of the big things that everybody does is walk the dogs. Socialize cats. We can do in-kennel training. When I talk about in-kennel training, I don't actually mean, I mean the animal is in the kennel. It doesn't mean volunteers have to be in the kennel. But doing a lot of reinforcing of calm behavior, 4 paws on the floor, eye contact, sitting nicely at the front of the kennel. For both dogs and cats, that can be a really good kind of adoptable thing. If, a potential adopter walks up to the front of the kennel and the dog sits nicely, like that's already like a nice selling point, opposed to if the dog's like jumping up at the front of the kennel. So that can be a really easy thing for our behavior volunteers to do. Some places do some obedience training. It depends again on the level of your volunteers, the level of your dogs. We can do dog play groups. That can be another nice activity for your volunteers to do, an out of kennel socialization time for cats. Some shelters will do puppy K. So if you have like litters of puppies and they're being adopted out, you can either run puppy K with volunteers, so the volunteers attend and they have the puppies and try and do some basic socialization with the puppies, or if they're adopted dogs out, the dogs can come back with their owners and do a puppy K at your shelter, depending what your shelter looks like, your premises, your facilities. Similar kind of thing for kitten K, you know, it's just socialization for the time for animals. Then we start getting into like some of the more higher level behavior volunteer activities, like your behavior modification. So if you have dogs in your shelter who have certain behaviors that you're trying to work on, then we can start to look at some of that behavior modification element. Provide education for fosters and adopters. So again, you know, if you can get your behavior volunteers up to a point where they're really confident talking about training, talking about behavior modification, then they can actually help do a lot of that education with fosters and adopters. One thing that I love doing, I think it's really useful, is having your volunteers train other volunteers. It's a really clever way of using your volunteer pool, you know, and taking some of that effort away from your staff, because if you don't have a lot of staff, you don't have the resources to do training, and that can be a really nice way. And some volunteers really enjoy training people, you know, opposed to training just the animals as well. And then there's other enrichment activities. So we will talk about some of that basic enrichment stuff that you can do with your volunteers. Does anybody get any questions or anything they would like to add to that list? That is not an exhaustive list in any way, shape, or form. No. Okay, let me just see if I. Yeah. Okay, so then I just wanted to go through like some of your benefits. So what are the benefits of a behavior program opposed to just a normal volunteer program? For your volunteers, it just provides them with more training and understanding of animal behavior and training. And I feel like the more they get involved and the more they start to understand about training, it just helps them become better ambassadors for the shelter. And it also helps you get a better understanding of your individual animals that are available for adoption, and they can really prove invaluable feedback. You know, quite often with staff, the staff are really looking after what I call the basic needs. Now, I know the basic needs of animals are more just outside the, you know, keeping their kennel clean, feeding, watering, but quite often that's where your staff focus is. So, you know, utilizing a behavior program, you can really start to spend more time with the animals and using your volunteers to understand more about each individual animal. For your staff, I know a lot of shelters just, you know, there's not enough hours in the day to do everything that you want to do and provide the support that you want for your animals. So by utilizing your behavior volunteers, you can really help provide support in areas where resources may be low. You know, particularly things like just getting the dogs out of kennel. And, you know, it's great that you exercise them out of kennel, but really if you can start to do some really, even just basic training with them, it really helps them be more adoptable. And then for your dogs, any kind of enrichment that we can help provide our dogs helps to reduce, you know, your fear, anxiety, stress in the shelter environment. And animals can learn behaviors that makes them more adoptable. So that's some of the benefits. There is lots more, but that was just the summary that I had. Okay. Oh, yeah, Lynn?
I just want to mention too, we have a 501c3 that funds us. So we also buy training equipment like harnesses that keep dogs. It reduces reactivity in the shelter, and we teach the volunteers how to utilize that equipment, along with we do have dogs that require muzzles and require hoods and require tandem leashing, but we'll do probably 18,000 animals this year.
Wow.
And we have 6 levels of behavior. So it can get kind of hairy. And I'm specifically looking for good ideas and how to reduce that reactivity in the kennel area. We do Click for Quiet. We do kennel routine. We do the kennel routine that's taught through the play group people, Dogs Play for Life. But anything else additionally, ideas, I'm really interested in. Thanks.
Okay. Great. So maybe we can have a little chat at the end, Len, about like specific ideas around that, because today it's going to be more, my thing is really how to structure a behavior program, because it sounds like you guys are already like on it. And, you know, 6 levels is quite a lot as well. Like that's impressive, but I've seen, you know, and I think that's the thing as well about a lot of these behavior programs. I would really say start simple and then you can start growing it, because you also have to have the infrastructure in place. So it's great that you have your 501c, what, you know, your charity groups, although a lot of shelters do have, you know, their friends of the shelter who provide them with finances and can really help to kind of provide equipment for some of these programs. You know, because lots of shelters, it depends on your shelter. You could be just working, you have a slip leash, you know, that's all the equipment that you have. And then some shelters, you know, are able to use harnesses. They've got the, you call it the hood, but I know what you mean, or halties or muzzles, you know, whatever it is. So that's it can be a really good way to kind of get some more of that equipment as well. So I guess what I wanted to share with you guys is how do we actually develop a behavior program? And I think that's why you have to look at each of your individual shelters and really look at, you know, what is your animal intake look like? So it sounds like some of you guys have behavior dogs. So, you know, and we'll talk a little bit about how I kind of split up the animals, but, you know, you might see dogs that have reactivity. You might see dogs who are very fearful, you know, and you have different levels of fear, you have different levels of reactivity. They can be very stressed in kennel, and they can be, you know, very bouncy, jumpy, mouthy, all of these things that we see in kennel. So it depends, like if you have animals with those behaviors versus do you have just like a big population, and unfortunately those animals are not, you know, they're either moved to other groups or whatever your shelter looks like. You've got to consider what that looks like and then how you want your behavior volunteers to support that. So for me, it's like, okay, what do I actually want? What activities are going to be beneficial within my shelter, and how can we train our volunteers to perform those activities? What are the levels? So, you know, do you have very easy dogs? That's one of the feedbacks that I get, like lots of shelters just don't have very easy dogs. So it's kind of difficult for volunteers to start because they've not got that easy kind of dog to handle, you know, work with. And so already the dogs that they're working with can be kind of challenging. So it can be difficult to learn from that. Also, what resources have you got? So do you guys actually have trainers on staff available that you can help to roll out these programs? Because at some point you're going to want to have some sort of skill set that can provide the base of your program, you know. So if you at least have access to one trainer, how do you maximize the use of the trainer to get the biggest bang for your buck? Yeah. Do you have training space available? You know, like some shelters have nice yards, some of them have quiet spaces, quiet rooms that you can utilize for training. So what does your space look like? Or do you just have kennels and you take the dogs out and you walk them? So you kind of look at what your space is looks like, and then how you can utilize that space for training. Also your equipment, you know, do you have harnesses available? Do you have, you know, do you want to do muzzle training with your animals? Do you want to do halty training with your animals? Also, a lot of the enrichment activities, like do you have like slow feeders? Do you have Kongs? Like, and if you do have these things, do you have the ability to clean these things? Because that's the other part of it. You might be able to use them, but then you have this big pile of Kongs and they're dirty Kongs, and then you can't clean them. So, you know, it's kind of looking at all these equipment. And then also other low cost activities you can do. You know, there's a lot of low cost enrichment activities. We'll talk a little bit about that, and that you can use. And just as I said, remember that you can use volunteers to train other volunteers, but you've got to build that into a program, and you've got to make sure that your volunteer trainers have got the right training so that they are teaching new volunteers, you know, correctly. So the last thing is, how do we ensure that training is consistent across trainers? So if you are using volunteers, what does that look like, and how do you keep it consistent? And I'm going to show you some of the like cheat sheets that I have, like training guidelines that I've used, checklists for trainers, and then also just quizzes to kind of at the end of the training to make sure that you've really covered the points that are important to you. Any questions on that? Nope. Okay. I don't know why. Okay. So I have just put here. I have put just kind of a couple of assumptions on here. A couple of, for me, like this kind of the outline or frame that I'm going to talk through is basically assuming that you have access to like a qualified trainer, or, you know, somebody has a good background. And I utilize positive reinforcement training. I recommend we all use that within our in our shelters. But having access to a qualified trainer is very useful. And also, hopefully you have a volunteer coordinator manager that can help coordinate this program. And it doesn't actually have to be a volunteer coordinator manager. It just has to be someone within your shelter who's been identified as a focal point for this kind of thing. And again, there's ways around both of these things if you don't have that, but that's what I'm basing my presentation on today. So just a little bit, so we've talked about how we can kind of grade our volunteers. So this is a way that I've done it. And it's basically to color code our dogs. So we color code our dogs, and then we color code our volunteers. Like, so with their yellow entry-level dogs, and they can be called, this can be called whatever you want, if you want to call it level 1, whatever. But for me, this is kind of one way that I've seen. So yellow dogs is our entry-level dogs. And so all our volunteers who can work with those dogs wear a yellow name badge. Makes it really simple for the staff, for other volunteers. They can see, okay, that person's wearing a yellow badge. That means they can work with yellow dogs. Same, once they're kind of worked their way through, they can then like get promoted to green. So they wear a green badge. That means that they can work with green dogs and yellow dogs. And then blue, same. So it's just a very easy identifier. There's lots of ways of different ways of doing it. For me, this is kind of how we've coded. So I've generally worked in no-kill shelters. So we have like a lot of more varied dogs, you know, with different levels of behavior. So I have my yellow dogs. They're kind of generally smallish or medium size. They're easy to walk on leash, so they generally don't need any special equipment to walk. They've not really got any visible behavior concerns that we see. Yeah. And then, then our next level would be green. So that's kind of our intermediate level. So they're generally, they're kind of bigger and stronger, or they have like, they could be moderately dog reactive. So I mean that when they see another dog, they might bark, they might lunge a little bit, but they're not going to like drag you across the road towards another dog. Hyperactive, you know, jumpy, bouncy, mouthy, whatever that looks like, or mild to moderate fear and anxiety. You know, they might jump and grab at the leash, but you can distract them with food. So that's kind of my middle tier. And then like my top tier is your more experienced volunteers working with your challenging behaviors. And really what it is like a combination of any of the previous behaviors. So they're very strong, and they're reactive, or they're hyperactive, or they're highly fearful or anxious. And also they can potentially if you're not reading them correctly, they could be a potential bite risk. So that's kind of the way that I have grouped these dogs. And then I group my volunteers kind of to reflect that. But you can group your dogs however you like. And you can also group your volunteers. Like maybe this doesn't work because maybe all your dogs are like yellow dogs. That'd be awesome. So, you know, you might want to focus on what does my volunteer program look like? It's more going to be, I'm going to focus on, you know, all my volunteers can work with all my dogs, but certain volunteers work on specific things that are more advanced or less advanced, you know. And then I've got in here, like we have like a red dog, which is basically staff only, you know, for whatever reason, we decided to make those dogs staff only. Any questions about your color codes for your dog?
Hi, can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes.
Hi. Yes, I am a volunteer coordinator for the local Humane Society here in Parkersburg, West Virginia. We have green, blue, and red volunteers. Green basically is your mentoring. You come in new and you follow a seasoned volunteer. And then blue, our blue pretty much matches like what your green is. And then our red is the combination of strong and reactive.
Yeah.
We just don't have any, like you said, we don't have any green dogs. We start a volunteer out and we hardly have any dogs. I mean, we have people that want to help, want to volunteer, want to come. I organize an evening walk to get the dogs out and get them socialized and get them exercised. But we just very rarely have dogs that they can walk. I mean, we have some blues and mostly reds. And so, you know, we struggle with finding, you know, good volunteers that want to stick around. They come for a few times and they're just pulled down the, you know, they're pulled down and just beat up by the time they leave for the evening. So that's one of the things that we deal with is, yeah.
Yeah. And I think unfortunately that seems to be pretty standard across the board, because also those are the dogs that are going to get adopted quickest. Because, you know, people come into a shelter and what they're looking for, they're looking for a nice, easy dog that they can walk easily and, you know, doesn't have any behavior concerns. So even if you do have them, they have a very quick turnaround. But yeah, like I'm going to talk through a little bit like what that could look like for a yellow volunteer or a green volunteer. So yeah, your basic entry volunteer and some of the things that they can do. So yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute. Is there anybody here who works with cats or cat volunteers? No, not really. Okay, so I have also done it because I have worked with cats. So you can do the exact same thing with the cats. Like you know, you can decide what does my color codes look like, what do my levels look like, and how am I going to fit those cats? You know, obviously with cats, we don't tend to walk them. I guess you can train them to walk in a harness, but there's different things you can do with cats as well. It's just, you know, your only limitation in this is really your imagination. But yeah, so I've kind of color coded the cats as well. And if anybody does work with cats and wants to talk more about that, and I'm happy to do that as well. Okay. So these are kind of some of the things that I would say for entry-level volunteers. So easy, you know, our volunteers are literally brand new to the shelter. So yeah, walk yellow coat dogs if we have any yellow coat dogs. And the challenge as well is sometimes you'll have, like, I don't know how many volunteers you train at one time. You could have to 12, 20 volunteers, and then they all turn up and they want to walk a yellow dog, and you've got one yellow dog or two yellow dogs. So that poor dog gets walked like 10 times in the day, you know. But so walking yellow dogs is something they can do. But the other element is enrichment. Now, where we kind of get stuck up a little bit on enrichment is people can prepare no-touch enrichment for all the dogs, but they don't, but then the volunteers aren't actually getting to interact with the dog. So that's great. You know, they can create, you know, they can stuff Kongs, they can make slow feeders, they can get, you know, the cardboard egg cartons, put treats in them or muffin trays or whatever it looks like. They can do a lot of that. but they're not actually getting to interact with the dogs. So that can become a little frustrating, because if you have joined up to a shelter, you want to, I'm guessing you want to interact with the animals. And then you're like, okay, you go into the kitchen and do these things. It kind of get a little frustrating. I think one thing I would say is, if you have volunteers and like you explain to them the importance of enrichment, and I'm not really going to go into that, but hopefully everybody, you know, the more enrichment we can provide our dogs, the better it is for their anxiety and stress in the shelter environment. So we can explain that to people, but other things we can do is providing the in-kennel training. And so clicking for calm is a really good one. 4 paws on the floor, you know, so you do have to do like a little bit of education on that and teach the volunteers what they're looking at. But, you know, you start with really simple things you can do in kennel. So 4 paws on the floor, if the dog is not jumping up, we're just going to, you know, click or say yes, or whatever the marker word is you're going to use, and then just toss them a treat. And, you know, they can work with several dogs, and they can also work with dogs who are not yellow dogs. They can work with their green dogs and blue dogs because they're not actually in the kennel. They're just clicking outside the kennel and tossing the treats, or rewarding for eye contact, or rewarding for sit. So that's a really, these things are really great for the dogs as well, because they start to learn that good things happen in their kennel. Because quite often our dogs are just so desperate to get out because all the good things happen outside their kennel and no good things happen in their kennel. So if we can start to really build some of this in kennel training with the dogs, it can be really helpful. And then also the other thing that can be useful is trying to use your higher level volunteers. So I would say like that middle level volunteers, probably not your highest level, because they're probably working with dogs that you don't want brand new volunteers to be interacting with. But those middle level volunteers, they could, you know, so their entry level could shadow them, you know, walk with them, see what does a green dog look like? What does their behavior look like? Why is it different from a yellow dog? And that can be really, really powerful as well. So those are some of the activities that I see for your yellow code volunteers. So the training for them is, so the first thing that I like to do is like a classroom session, because we really want to introduce these new people. They're keen, they want to work with us, so we want to introduce them to the shelter. What is your shelter? What does it look like? What does it do? And also this can be a really good opportunity to educate people about your shelter, because honestly, I've really seen, and I don't know, you guys have probably seen the same, if I have 12 volunteers in that first session, I might retain maybe 6 come back. And then over time, I'm down to 2 or 3 out of that 12. The retention rate is low. And so instead of just using this as like an introduction to you're a volunteer, you can use it as an education session, because even if these guys don't come back and volunteer for you, if they go away thinking, oh, well, maybe volunteering at the shelter is not for me, but I can donate, I can give money, or I can give food, or I can spread the word, or I can recommend other people to come here, or, you know, so they actually become ambassadors for your shelter. So it's not just about training them as a volunteer, because quite often a lot of them just don't come back. But if you can really instill in them, you know, and some of the issues that maybe your area sees with homeless dogs and homeless cats, or, you know, things like that, what can they do if they see a homeless dog? You know, so really kind of build it into a little bit of an education system, education session to try and build ambassadors for your shelter. In that initial 1 hour, I also talk a little bit about enrichment. Why is enrichment important in the shelter? How do you do enrichment? And then also a little bit about the in-kennel training. After the classroom session, so if I have 12 volunteers, I split them into like groups of 3, and then they do like a couple of hours of a hands-on session. And they would do that with an experienced volunteer who's trained to train them. They might go over, you know, basic walking rules, like what does your shelter look like? You know, how do you take dogs out the kennel? How do you put them back in the kennel? Are there specific things you should do, you shouldn't do? And then I like to give the new volunteers a little opportunity to at least bring some dogs out and then put them back in. I find that if you have them do that under like the watchful eye of a trainer, it just gives them a bit more confidence, because getting that first dog out is sometimes the biggest hurdle. Because once you've done your first one, it's like, okay, I've done my first one, I feel a bit better about it, but it's getting that first dog out can be really quite a block. So that's why it can be useful to do it in that first 2-hour training session. Go over, where do you keep your enrichment activities? And then and then we can also do a little bit of in-kennel training. So, only interact with the dog when they've got 4 paws on the floor, use treats to reinforce them for having 4 paws on the floor. And then at the end of that session, I just have a quiz. And honestly, I'm quite strategic about the questions that I have in the quiz, because what I want to do is reinforce the key points. So the quiz is not actually really a quiz to make sure that, they were paying attention and they've learned anything. It's to reinforce the key points that you want them to go away remembering. So, maybe think about 6 key questions. It will also give you a good idea that they have actually been paying attention to the training, but it also just reinforces those key elements. And then at the end of the session, I also like to provide them a little bit of feedback, if there's things that I think that they should focus on a little bit more, or yeah. So that's kind of what I do for my basic entry volunteers. Anyone else got any thoughts on that, or things that they do a little differently? Or
Hi, I'm from New York. I'm from a pretty big shelter. We're rebuilding our volunteer program because obviously we lost a lot. We're municipal. They shut us down all through COVID. So we're rebuilding the program. And one thing I've noticed was a lot of people that maybe, even if they couldn't physically, were capable of taking the dogs out, because our building's really old. You need to be a gymnast to even get the dogs in and out beyond the behavior. It's just not built for what we do there. And one of the things that I found is really, really engaging the new volunteers with other activities they can do, teaching them about sponsor pages on Facebook for specific dogs, coming and taking pictures of the other volunteers. All volunteers, whether you're active or not, can attend our training workshops to build up their skill set. Our enrichment program is this one wonderful volunteer. She had had knee surgery, and she came in every single day and would prepare the enrichment, and she would go around to the kennel and kind of do both things, like you were saying, in kennel training while giving the enrichment. And what we started to see was anytime any of these dogs, no matter what level they were, when they'd see her walking through the driveway, they would instantly sit.
yeah,
And they for her. And it was really nice that she had a very specific relationship with a lot of these dogs. So when she would go back to walk, she could walk higher level dogs because they were just so engaged with her. Our big thing with training our volunteers is engagement training. You want that dog engaged with you. So we're just currently rebuilding, but that's kind of it.
yeah, no, great, I love it. Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge. It's like when you get these brand new, really enthusiastic, keen volunteers. I'm quite honest, like when I first started at the shelter as well, I was like, oh, I'm super enthusiastic about dogs, and I'm a dog. I've had dogs all my life. I know what dogs are. And then you walk into a shelter environment and you're like, wow, this is completely different. And it can be very overwhelming. And I think that's why when you do see, your yellow code volunteers, like trying to find things that they can do to really keep them engaged is important. And I think the challenge is sometimes, we overwhelm them with really stuff that's not hands-on with the animals. And I think that's where you see some frustration, because people are like, I came to the shelter to work with the animals, and I'm not working with the animals. But yeah, so that's, anybody else got anything they want to add?
Yeah, we actually encourage our new people to team up.
Yes.
And have one person handle and one person watch and comment, and then switch off, so that, because you can't see everything from behind the dog. So if you can get some feedback from someone who's non-threatening, another new person, it really helps, and it brings people, I think, to that feeling that maybe I can do this a little quicker.
I love that. I've never heard. Yeah, I love that. I really like that, because also as well, you know, when you're going to a new shelter and you're still learning everything about it and like the way it works, if you have a buddy there, then it makes it a lot easier. And then you can, yeah, I love that thought.
This is Lori again from West Virginia. I am the volunteer coordinator and I do the new I do a new orientation class once a month.
Mhm.
And it's funny that you mentioned two of the things that, because I try to poll my volunteers after I don't see them for a while, I try and contact them again by email. The two of the things that they say that keep them from coming back are getting the dog out of the kennel and then getting the dog out of the shelter, because then I call it arguing with every dog as we get them out of the shelter. There's two of the things that really keep our new volunteers from coming back.
Yeah. And I think it's dependent on, you know, your shelter, how it's designed. Yeah, like I used to work at a shelter in Australia, and we've just basically got a narrow walkway down the middle and then just like mesh on either side, and you have like, you know, 10 dogs on each side, and they're separate kennels, and they're just barking the whole way down. And, you know, it's like walking the gauntlet. You're like your dog and you've got to take it down the middle. And, you know, different shelters do teach different methods of how they do that. So maybe that's where, you know, trying to get them to buddy up is a good way. And maybe you need to do like another session, like it might not be a formal training session, but maybe like a more informal training session where, you know, they're just bringing the dogs in and out and somebody's there with them, and it just gives them a bit more confidence. And if they have to, the more experienced person can grab the dog and say, okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's very good ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a challenge. It is a big challenge. Okay, so then our green dogs, so that's like more your intermediate. So basically what I say is once you've completed 20 hours of volunteer service at your yellow level, lots of people do different. I actually find sometimes 20 hours is like a little bit much, but if I see like a volunteer who's coming in, they're looking really good, they're looking confident and comfortable with what they're doing. If like they've reached about 12, then I'll start to program in, like I'll start to schedule in their green level training, just so that they're like, okay, I know my training's coming up and I need to do my extra hours just to get there. So your green level, there you go, your intermediate level. And I would say, in a lot of shelters, this is where your majority of dogs are, you know. Yeah, so your green level volunteers, they can walk the green code dogs or walk your intermediate level dogs, and they can do the in-kennel training, same, and they can do their basic obedience training if that's something you do at your shelter. Additional roles that you could do is if you do have playgroups can be a really good thing for volunteers. And they can be a playgroup assistant. So they're not quite at a level where they can run playgroups, but they can help like bring dogs in. It's really useful for them to be in playgroup and watch the dogs interact and watch the body language. And then the other thing they can do is train yellow and or green badge volunteers. But both of these roles have additional training that the volunteers must do. But those are a couple of other things that you can do at your green level. And honestly, for the prerequisite, the reason I say complete 20 hours is because I want to see some level of a commitment, because I don't want to start really putting a lot of time, and it sounds terrible, but putting a lot of time and effort and, you know, resources into training a volunteer if they're not going to commit and they're not going to continue coming. So if you put in that basic amount of like hours that they have to do, that kind of shows they have some skin in the game. Yeah. Okay, so what does their training look like?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you co-house dogs? Do you have dogs more than one in a kennel?
So the shelters where I have been, we have only co-housed dogs who come in together. So if we think, you know, they're bonded pairs, I'm really interested. I haven't got a lot of experience of the co-housing. It's an area that really fascinates me, like how you assess dogs and put them in together. But yeah, I haven't got experience of that. So I don't know if anybody else on the call has.
Yeah, we don't have, we only have, the only dogs that are single in the kennels are the dogs that have proven that they can't be co-housed. So all our dogs are co-housed, except the dogs who can't be. And we don't always co-house the same dot level with the same dot level. So we have that additional training of how do you get the dog out that you're capable of handling and not interact with the dog who's a higher level.
Yeah, yeah. Because that's one thing, like when you have more than one dog in the kennel, like and that's part of the training. So like, I don't know, this is all very high level. Like I'm not going into any detail about what actually sits in, because it really depends on your shelter. But yeah, like if you have 2 dogs in a kennel, 2 people go in that kennel. If you have 3 dogs in the kennel, 3 people go in that kennel, because I've seen it go wrong too many times when you're going in and you're trying to take one dog out and then, all the dogs are out. So, but yeah, and adding in the complexity if they're different levels, yeah, whatever your process or procedure. So that's where you really need to map out what is the key elements that we need these volunteers to know and at what level. Do they need to know that? Like, is that something a yellow level needs to know? Because maybe, I don't know, or is that more a green thing? Or yeah. So yeah, the co-housing really really interests me. I'm interested to learn more about that. So for the green level, one of the things we ask, we do a classroom session and we focus on body language. The reason why I kind of do it at the green level and not at the yellow level is I just find that at the yellow level, they're still trying to learn so much that if you try to also add body language in there, it can just be a bit overwhelming. Some people make it the first thing that any volunteers do. Body language for me is crucial because that's how the dog communicates with you, and you need to understand the dog's body language when you're working with them, because that's the way that you keep yourself safe. If you're doing work with other dogs, like dog to dog work, you need to understand the body language so that you can see how those dogs are kind of interacting, and it helps you like see if behavior is escalating. So body language is key. So we do like a 2-hour classroom session, goes through the body language of the dog and all the different meanings. And then we do hands-on training sessions. So again, small groups, like 2 to 3 volunteers per group with a volunteer trainer. And then they actually work with some of the strong dogs, reactive dogs, fearful dogs. We will go through like the protocols of how we introduce ourselves to these dogs, how we work with these dogs. We do then start to go into some of the more equipment. So generally we use harnesses, and we use like different shelters use different ones, but I tend to use a front clip harness, but some of the harnesses also have a front clip and a back clip harness. So you can actually double clip, and then you can, if it's a really strong dog, you can have 2 handlers work together to walk one dog, but it just also gives them a bit more confidence when handling. Reactive dogs, we go through kind of basic protocols of how to handle reactivity, so the dog's not reacting all the time. And then fearful dogs just really go through, take your time. Those are the kind of the 3 main dogs that we kind of see at the shelter. There's also other behaviors, but those are kind of the focus for the green handlers. And then we might go through some basic obedience training, things that they can do with the dogs when they're working with them. We always want to encourage like attention to handler. So again, reinforcing if the dog looks at you, we're going to reward that, because that's like a really nice behavior. We like our dogs checking in with us and being focused on the handler. And then again, at the end of each of those hands-on training sessions, we do like a little quiz and then do some feedback. So again, with the quiz, we're just focusing on what's the key elements that I want this volunteer to go away with. And so that's what I'm going to ask in the quiz, so that if they don't know the answer, you can also have the discussion. So it's not like, if you don't pass this, you're not going to be a handler, a green handler. It's more like, these are really important things that we need you to know the answers to. So if you're not sure, ask, and we'll go through it again. So that's kind of the green level. and the big focus I would say is generally these dogs, okay, all dogs are a bite risk, but these dogs, we don't see them as being a bite risk. So that's kind of the biggest differentiator between a green and blue. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, so then we do have these other additional roles. So playgroup assistant. Again, if people show interest in like doing playgroup, I would ask that they handle more of the green dogs, and then you can start talking to them about being playgroup assistants. And that's generally hands-on training of actually going to playgroup, seeing how it's run, see where they can help. A yellow badge trainer. So the way that I generally do my training with people who want to be trainers is I have them shadow some training sessions. So if I'm going to do yellow badge training today as a trainer, and I have another volunteer who wants to become a yellow badge trainer, they come, they watch me do the training. Then the next time, if they're comfortable, they can do the training and I will shadow them. And then we might do that twice. And to a point where I'm like, yeah, I feel comfortable, you can give this training, and then they can become a trainer. So very much that, watch, do, whatever the phrase is, but that hands-on. We just want to make sure that our trainers are solid and they're using the correct handling, and they have a good understanding of the shelter and the way that you do your training, because they are teaching the new volunteers. So we need them to be solid. Yeah. Any questions? Comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
If somebody comes in that is, I'm kind of going through this right now. Somebody comes in as a certified handler, a certified trainer, and they want to volunteer. Obviously, I want to nurture that because I would love to have that. I feel like that skips quite a few steps.
Yeah.
But I have to start them at the lowest level so they can get, acclimated. When we're dealing with a large group of people who can get a little bit upset or feel overlooked because I'm pushing someone up too quickly, what safety nets do you find work with moving someone up quickly based on their skill set and not offending everybody else?
Yeah, so I guess one way that I've done it is like when people want to upgrade, I ask them to fill out a form. So, if they say like, I want to upgrade, and then it's, there'll be some questions on that form, like, have you done the required hours? But, why do you want to upgrade? And I think that's like, it can be difficult, because I have been in that position when I am a certified trainer and I go to a new shelter and I'm like, hey, I am a certified trainer, and they're like, okay, but you kind of need to follow the same process as everybody else. I'm like, okay, well, I'll do my 20 hours of enrichment, and then I'll walk the yellow dogs, which kind of seems crazy, but that's fine. Yeah, it's how you manage that. I think though, if somebody has a qualification, like if they have an actual qualification, I feel like that's it's okay to say to everybody, well, actually they have this certification. The challenge being if they don't have the certification, but they are a very good trainer, but you just want to make sure that they are as good as they say they are if they don't have the qualification, And I think the other challenge, like even with some of these certifications, is it depends where they've got their certification. It's very different working with shelter dogs, as I say, compared to like, you can do your certifications based on teaching puppy K, and that's quite a different environment. So sometimes it is having that conversation with the person who's coming, like the trainer, and just say, look, I want to fast track you, but I just need to be, I also want you to be confident of the environment and the shelter, because like some of these things, it's not just about handling the dogs, it's also learning about how the shelter does the stuff. Because they might have a way of doing it, but you really want everybody to do whatever your shelter policies and procedures are. Yeah, and honestly, like if they're keen, like you can fast track them pretty quickly. Like, that yellow badge, they can really, if they can demonstrate they can get dogs in and out of the kennel quickly, then you can move them up to that green. And then the green level, you know, they might work with, some of the green level dogs can be quite tricky anyway. But yeah, it's a hard one. It's however you feel comfortable, and you don't want to upset other volunteers. And that's where sometimes, like, being very clear, like I've had volunteers who, you know, are at green level, but then I see them doing things wrong, or people have complained to me about their handling. So then I've got to go back and say, hey, you know, I want you to do like a little refresher, or like, you know, I've heard you're struggling with some of the dogs or whatever it is, you know, so it's that balance. So I didn't really, that gives you a little bit of an idea, but yeah. I mean, the other thing is, if you actually have trainers within your organization, you know, you could have your new volunteer who's the trainer kind of work with the trainers a little bit as well. So it kind of almost changes their role slightly. I don't know. I've done that as well. Yeah.
Can I, one thing that you said is really, really important, and that is that not all certifications are equal. And you do need to investigate the specific certification. And because we've had people sign on as volunteers that we fast tracked because they were certified, later to find out that they had no idea what positive reinforcement training was.
Yeah.
So we actually just kind of agreed to not fast track anybody.
Yeah.
Because most of the information you're looking for those first few weeks is just how to get in and out of the kennel, what routes to take, what doors to exit, how to bring a dog back in, what the rules are of the shelter. With us, it's what the county's rules are. All of that takes up all of your, I mean, and certification doesn't teach you that stuff.
No. And there's some certifications like, you know, I am CPD DKA, and you have to have done a certain amount of hands-on training, but no one really checks that. And the CPD DKA is like a multiple choice test. It doesn't test your hands-on skills. So
No.
yeah, that's where
4 CPDTKA trainers, but I guarantee you there's no one who's employed by the county who understands what that is.
yeah.
So
Yeah, it's being careful. Like for me, when I work with any trainers, because I do a lot of playgroup, and I'm very careful about playgroup, because playgroup is great for your dogs, but it also needs to be managed very well, because if you're gung-ho about it, you can't have incidents, you know, and that's when people get hurt and dogs get hurt and dogs get in trouble, you know. So when people are like, oh, I'm a trainer, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, come to playgroup and let's see, you know, like I want to see what's your experience, and do you think the same way, and how do you introduce dogs, because everybody does it a little bit different. So that's kind of my focus. Like, and it's hard because I want to keep, if I have a trainer and I think they're like a good trainer, then I want to keep them engaged, and yes, they're going to be an absolute asset to the shelter. But I also want to be sure that there's the type of trainer that I want, and that they're actually going to be an asset to the shelter. Because I've also had an experience recently when a guy came in and he was like a trainer, and he was like training one of the dogs, and then we found out like he was doing like trying to teach the dog to be like a bite dog or something, and he had that, you know, and so it was just like, okay, that's not what we want, you know.
by the way, most of our co-housing decisions are made by the dogs in playgroup. We watch how they interact with each other. That's how we do it.
Yeah. That's what I've heard about how people do it. Playgroup. I love playgroup. Anyway. Okay, so now we've got like our highest level of volunteers. So these are, you know, These are ones who work with our most difficult dogs. You know, they can walk blue dogs, they do in-kennel training, various, and also behavior modification. Additional roles that your highest level volunteers, again, playgroup leaders, and then training your other badged colors volunteers. What I generally say, again, completed 40 hours of volunteer service at green level. For some people, that's enough. For a lot of people, it's not. So I really want to be sure that when they go into the blue level, that they have worked with a lot of green dogs and their handling is strong, and also their understanding of body language is strong. So that's probably my two key things that I'm looking for. An ability to follow the rules. That's another thing I am very kind of focused on with my behavior volunteers. They have to follow the rules because it can get people into trouble. You know, if you have to change the code of color of a dog, for example, so they wear a green and you've now moved them to a blue, and then somebody's like, yeah, but I've worked with that dog a few times, but they're just a green volunteer and they go in with that dog. You know, I've had to have really difficult conversations and say, you cannot work with that dog. There's a reason the dog's been changed, you know, code. So following the rules is kind of an important one for me as well. So what the training for this looks like is, again, we do small groups. Just the small group sessions seem to work well. You don't want too many volunteers in a group to the trainer, just because you want these to be really hands-on sessions, and you want to ensure that your volunteers are engaged throughout the training. So we do like 3 sessions, and each session is 2 hours. And this really is just like an introduction of how to work and manage with each of these dogs. And what we normally find is we start to, with some of these dogs, we do start to put behavior modifications in there. If it's a specific kind of protocol that we're following, we may also even make these dogs team dogs. So you might have a small group of volunteers who volunteer to work with these specific dogs on a specific protocol. So then, yeah, you're even making the blue level kind of even smaller and making them team dogs. You can do that in the green level as well. If there's for some reason you don't feel the dog needs to be worked with your most experienced volunteers, but they could do benefit from a real structured program or a specific modification plan, you can make them team dogs. I try to avoid having too many team dogs because it does become a little bit difficult to manage. And if you've only got a small team working with these dogs, if the team's too small, they might not get worked every day or get out of kennel every day. And we want these dogs, they need to get as much enrichment as they can. Yeah, and then I've just wrote here as well, like they have ongoing training with your trainers, just because they're working generally with much more challenging behaviors. So they kind of interact with their trainers on a regular basis. So that's my blue level. And then again, yeah, your blue level, they can do additional training. If you guys have play groups, I would make these people my playgroup leads, but again, they have to have hands-on training with the trainers and other experienced blue volunteers. So yeah, these are kind of like additional trainings that you give them to do these roles. Okay. So I kind of talked through this a little bit, but I basically said that, you know, when we're doing, when I have volunteers who want to become trainers, I ask them to like submit an expression of interest application. In this application, it's just a very high level, but it kind of asks them, why do they want to be a trainer? You know, like, have they got any experience of giving training or, you know, training individuals, those kind of things. And then I have the new trainer shadows the experienced trainer, 1 or 2 sessions. And then the experienced trainer shadows the new trainer as they give the training session and then provides any feedback. And we make sure we provide all our trainers with a cheat sheet, which outlines exactly what should be included during the training session. You know, the key points to touch on, the key things we really want to instill during those training. because the challenge is as well, there's so much information. And even tonight, I'm like, there's so much information like I want to share, but you know, you've just got to focus on the key points, like what's really important to a brand new volunteer coming in. What's the key points that you need them to know? Okay, now they're ready to move up a level. What's the key points these guys need to know about working with the new level dogs? Okay. So these are just some other thoughts that I had when I was thinking about this. You know, think about how do you want volunteers to provide feedback? Because that's one challenge. If you do have a couple of trainers on board, I generally find my trainers are like overwhelmed. You know, my actual trainers who are working with the dogs within the shelter, they get very overwhelmed. And then if they have like 100 volunteers trying to talk to them about the specific dog with a specific issue, like it just gets quite unwieldy. So what's the best way for your volunteers to provide feedback on a dog? Like if they are walking a yellow dog and they're like, whoa, this dog's like showing some behaviors that may make it not a yellow, it might have to go to a green. Or if you have a green dog that's escalating to a blue, or maybe you have a blue dog who's actually calming down in kennel and could potentially be downgraded to green. What's the best way to communicate that? Also, how do volunteers like communicate with each other? So now there's a lot of, you know, different like chat apps. You know, you can set it up by dog, you can set it up by like color, then dog. Yeah, and then also who's going to monitor that, because you do have to have some level of monitoring it, because you don't want sometimes volunteers decide that they're going to change the way a dog does something or the way a dog's being trained just because they think that works, and then that can cause like havoc and mayhem. So you may want like, you know, your volunteer coordinator to monitor it, or I don't know, your media or your trainers, whoever it is. Volunteer login system to track hours and training, just so you can see exactly what hours people have done. Are they ready to move to the next stage? Volunteer recognition is a big one. So some ways we've done that is like, you know, if you have a volunteer who's like racking up hours, so, you know, reward them for like 100 hours, 500 hours, 1,000 hours, and then, you know, but whatever that looks like, or, you know, sharing when somebody does upgrades from like yellow to green, sharing that with the other volunteers, you know, it gives them people a little bit of like a little bit of recognition. So volunteer recognition is important, but understanding how people want recognized. And then I think like you guys, a few of you talked about, but actually additional knowledge and training. So if you do, if your trainers are like able to run little training sessions, and, you know, you might focus on a specific thing. So it might be, okay, we're going to focus on easy things you can do, like click and treat outside the kennel with the dogs in the kennel, and maybe more talking about reactivity. What's the best way to manage the reactivity? Can be enrichment sessions, you know, different types of enrichment you can do, different types of training you can do, different fun things you can do with the dogs, not just walk them, but, you know, take them on sniff walks or take them wherever it is. But yeah, so actually providing additional knowledge and training can be very useful. There are some shelters who will, I've worked at a shelter where they put you through a behavior training program, and then like one of the levels is you actually set your CPD KA, and then you can continue and then like set your certified dog behavior consultant, you know, so they actually have a program in place that gives you the education to get to that point. It's a great program, but it is a lot of work. And I would say like when you're first starting out a behavior program, that's maybe a little bit too aspirational, but it's definitely, you know, great things to do. And then we talked about, you know, there's also things like team working with, as we talked about, you know, you can set up small teams to work with a specific dog, or, you know, not just playgroup, but sometimes like some shelters, they'll actually match dogs up. So they have like a walking buddy and you parallel walk them. That can be a little bit less risk than playgroup. So if you're more risk averse and you'd rather do parallel walks, that can be a really nice way for the dogs to kind of socialize together, but with a little bit more control. Yeah. This was kind of, I'm not going to go on, we kind of talked through all of this anyway. And these are just some good resources online that I thought I would share with you guys. There's a lot of really good free resources. The Fear Free Shelter program, that's a really nice program. If you're part of a shelter, you can sign up for that. It's like an online course, and you just go through it. You can get Fear Free Shelter certified. But it just goes through a lot about reducing fear, anxiety, stress in the shelter. It also talks a lot about the body language of the animals. So really, it's a nice little free course. Shelter Playgroup Alliance. So I know we talked about Dogs Playing for Life. Someone mentioned Dogs Playing for Life. So I've done the Dogs Playing for Life stuff. I really like a lot of their things. I guess there's a couple of things in there that I find slightly aversive or not really aligned with like my Lima training. But I found Shelter Playgroup Alliance, and they're a lot more focused on positive reinforcement and really body language, how you introduce the dogs. They're generally do smaller play groups. They're not the massive play groups that they do at Dogs Playing for Life, but they also have a really good free program. It's a lot. The content is a lot, but it goes through body language, it goes through enrichment, it goes through cats and dog stuff, it goes through how to run play groups safely, how to break up fights, so how to work with highly aroused dogs, very stressed dogs, fearful dogs. So that is a really good program if you want to put your staff through it. They run a certain amount of cohorts a year. You can sign up and then work in it as a team. And then they will also come out to your shelter and do hands-on training, and everything is free. That's the other thing I like about it. Everything is free. And then ASPCA Pro, there's some good stuff there, and Maddie's Fun. There's other websites with really good free resources, but these are some that I thought I'd share. So I know I haven't covered everything for some people. I think some people were coming with a little bit more specific stuff that they wanted to cover. I guess this was just a very general overview. But if anybody's got any questions for me, or if there's specific things we would like to cover, I'm happy we could maybe have smaller chats another time about some of this stuff.
Do you have a Facebook page or something that we can follow specifically for you?
I do, yeah. I have my Facebook page. It's just my personal one. I also have an animal behavior one, but I don't really share much on it. But yeah, I can. Yeah, I'm trying to think what's the best way for me to share that. Let's see. But yeah, if you guys, you can like reach me on Facebook. I also do have my contact details. I can share my email with you, and then I can share my Facebook through my email. Can you guys see this? Can you see my Facebook page? So this is, I don't know how to. I don't know how to share this with you guys. Here. No, I'm sorry. I don't know how to. Hopefully you, I mean, if you found my stuff on Facebook, you can just go, I guess, find it and then ask to be friends with me and then reach out. Yeah. And like, I'm not, as I said, like I have a lot of experience with shelters. I have a lot of, and this is my email. It's suzanne.fleming22@gmail.com. So you feel free to email me as well. Yeah. I just love this stuff. I really, I love trying to help our volunteers, because I know that sometimes volunteers get quite frustrated because they want to be better and they want to help the animals, and there's not always those resources. So, you know, hopefully this presentation might have given you some thoughts about things you might do. It sounds like some people on the call, Lynn, you've like obviously got a lot of experience and you guys are doing great things, but I think sharing information with each other, sharing things that work well, sharing things that maybe don't work so well is a really good way. So maybe we could start up a little chat group or something that we could do that.
You know, that would be wonderful. I know that we started the Top Dogs program in Tucson at Pima Animal Care Center about 4.5 years ago. And volunteers were really underutilized. The 4 of us who are certified through CCPDT, we have one trainer who's a retired surgeon, one trainer who's a retired assistant district attorney, one person who's a retired systems analyst. We've found each other, and it just and what the shelter did for us is they gave us the freedom to create the programs that we wanted to do, and then continued to feed us needs. This is what we really need here. They put us in touch with Pet Support, and Pet Support started referring us to do the training sessions. And it started very small. It started with one training program, and it was a canine fun camp where we taught volunteers how to teach a dog to sit, how to teach a dog to down, how to take a dog through an agility course. And in 4.5 years of trust and helping us build and funding us, it's come a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it can. And sorry, I was just getting distracted by the chat. Somebody just chatting a message me in the chat. Yeah, and I think that sometimes the thing is like, start small. Like, what is the best way to implement this? And like, this can be a big change. Like, if right now you have a shelter and you don't like code your dogs, for example, and it's just a free for all and everybody works with every dog, you know, it can be a big step to kind of start to put some structure into there. Okay, well, let's like focus on how do we want to structure this program? How do we want our volunteers to help? And I think I've just been asked a question, you know, if you're a volunteer at a shelter, how do you offer your services to the shelter? Because I see that as well, like volunteers really, really want to help, but they're not maybe getting that uptake from the shelter. So if anybody has anything in that space as well that they would like to share, I guess for me, it's like, well, what are the easy wins that you can do as a volunteer to, like, maybe if there is an individual that you interact with, you know, like a volunteer coordinator or manager, like kind of think about, okay, well, and an enrichment program is quite often the first step into that, you know, by providing the dogs with more enrichment. And enrichment can cover so many things. So it can be slow feeders and puzzle toys, but enrichment is also training. That's a, you know, training, walking, exercising, digging, playgroup, social interaction with humans, social interaction with other dogs. All of this is enrichment. It's basically everything that the dog, you know, does is enrichment. And so starting to look at, like, is there ways you can do it? I think if you can start by maybe doing some research, kind of looking at some of these free sites and kind of looking at ways. So clicking for CAM is a really nice way to start as well. And because you can do it in protected contact, because the dogs are in the kennel, the person's outside, you know, a dog is jumping up, jumping up, jumping up. At some point, that dog has to stop jumping because they just need to take a break. And it might even be just a couple of seconds. Yes, mark it, feed the treat. And then slowly that dog's like, oh, why did I get a treat? And then it's like, jump, 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 jump. Oh, when I stopped there, I got clicked and treated again. And so you see these dogs who are like bouncing all over their kennel, and yeah, very slowly they just start to like put 4 paws in the ground. You know, with calmer dogs, like dogs naturally want to sit. So if you're just standing in front of the kennel and then the dog sits, click, treat, you know, like you can really start with very easy things. And you might not even have to, well, I shouldn't say that, but those are things like you can do without supervising, getting, you know, signed off, I think, from the shelter that, you know, you can do that, because quite often a lot of shelters, adopters can walk down the front of the kennels. So if the adopters can walk down the front of the kennels, so can, you know, volunteers, and just, you know, trying to offer those traits. So I think as well, like if you have thoughts on maybe some ways that you want to help, then maybe try and build a little, and there's other volunteers who might feel the same, then maybe try and go grab like a little focal group. Okay, what's the key things we can do to help the shelter, and then approach them. It can be hard getting buy-in, and sometimes depending what level you're the person that you're interacting with, like they might not have the say so to make changes. So it's like, how do you get in front of the decision makers within the shelter? And a lot of our shelters though do have like friends of, you know, the charities, or they have a board, or they have like open meetings for their volunteers. And sometimes it could be that as well. Like maybe that's a suggestion. It's like, you know, could we start to have like little sessions like once a quarter or something, like a couple of members of staff with some of the volunteers, and share ideas, like really trying to emphasize, we want to help you. We do not want to hinder, we really want to help. Yeah. And I think, you know, start, sometimes, you know, if you start, like I started just as a volunteer, and then I was like, oh, I really like this and I want to learn more, and I want to learn more. And then I got like qualifications, and, you know, so there is a lot of stuff available out there. I guess the only challenge I would say is looking for positive reinforcement training. We want to really stay in that realm. We don't want to use aversives or punishment based. Any other questions or comments or thoughts or things people want? No. Well, I mean, I'm happy to, if we have other things we want to talk about this more in depth, or if people want to like run through what their shelters look like and things that they might want to implement, you know, I'm happy to talk about that in the future as well.